Today's video is all about perfect stockinette. We're gonna explore how to go from this to this beautiful, almost perfect stockinette. First of all, I would like to analyze together with you this piece of knitted fabric, and let's see what problems do we see here. And first thing that stands out to me is this row of stitches right here. As you can see, it kind of stands out like it is maybe knitted in a different size knitting needles, or something happened to the direction of the yarn and the stitches so that it makes this row really stand out. And if we look closer, you will see that some rows do actually also stand out, like that one. Maybe not that much, but you can see that there are those different rows in here that look absolutely differently. The other thing that I'm noticing is that some of the stitches look kind of weirdly twisted. Maybe the yarn twisted on itself, like for example this stitch right here. Can you see how it's like directed like this way, and this one goes like in this direction? Then there is this stitch that looks a bit weird, and then here on the left we have a number of very weirdly looking stitches, like this one for example, that like you cannot see the right side of the stitch pretty much, and the left one is really prominent. Right here are all these like weirdly looking stitches. And another thing that I am noticing is different size of the stitches in general. For example, if we take a look, like in this area, the stitches are really small and really tight, while like here for example they are like really big and stretched. Let's see what actually happened here and why this fabric looks completely different from this swatch at the top. And one thing I want to say from the start is that I have used the same yarn. It is just a random sock yarn that I have found in my stash. I have used the same knitting needles. These are 3mm Chalgu metal needles, so the same size, but can you see how the gauge is different for these two swatches? And even though this part was knitted on 3mm needles as well, it does not look as nice as the top part. So what happened here if I used the same yarn, I used the same needle, and it was me knitting both of these swatches? I believe what I am about to tell you is the most underrated and under-talked invisible skill that you have in knitting, and that is holding constant tension. So the only thing that I have changed from knitting this part of the swatch to this one was that here I was holding constantly the same yarn tension. And now that we know it's all about the tension, let's see why these problems appeared in the bottom part. All of these prominent lines that you can see here is something that is called rowing, and because this swatch was knitted back and forth, I was actually knitting one row and then purling on the other side. And I do have tighter tension when I am knitting than when I am purling. And this is what creates these lines. Maybe you have noticed in your knitting that when you're knitting in the round, your knitting looks more uniform, while when you're knitting cardigans or scarves, for example, that are knitted back and forth, this is when you get those prominent purl. These are actually purl rows that I did. Another thing that we have already discussed are those weird twisted stitches that you can like easily see, like this ones for example. So why did this happen? Because I was not holding the constant tension here, and as you can see the tension here is way looser than in the top part. My stitches were left to decide on their own how they are gonna look. So the yarn could twist, it could take any shape it wanted because of the amount of air that this fabric had. So because I was not guiding how I want the yarn to sit in the actual stitch, it would just sit how it wanted. So this is what caused all of these twisted stitches and weird looking stitches. it was the fact that it had no tension to control how it actually looks. So now that we know that to go from this to this, you need to control your tension, let me show you how to do that. When we're knitting, we only have our needles and our hands to work with. And to hold constant tension, you would use your beautiful fingers. And I knew the majority of people when they start knitting, and I will be showing continental here. If you knit English style, I'm sure there are ways to hold the yarn to ensure the tension is constant, but I'm going to show continental here. And I knew that a lot of people, when they learn how to knit, this is what they do. So they would wrap their yarn around their index finger and will just let it like flow freely. So when I knit, my yarn actually like goes pretty like smoothly through my fingers because I cannot hold the tension like this, right? So this one is flowing quite freely. Like even if I try and grip the yarn in between my fingers, I can still, like it still moves as it wants. So what happens is that I cannot control nor the size of my stitches nor the tension, like basically anything. To make sure we hold constant tension, we need to find a way to wrap our yarn in between our fingers so that we can control whether it moves or not. And I'm going to show you how I do that, but then I'm going to give you a few more ideas of how you can position your yarn so that you can hold the tension when you are knitting. And it doesn't actually matter how you hold your yarn. The idea is for you to be able to willingly stop it so that it does not float freely. So this is how I do it. As I showed you before, I am just positioning it on top of my index finger, then going underneath the other two fingers, and then I am wrapping the yarn around my pinky. So now I cannot only hold the yarn with these two fingers, but I can actually control if my yarn moves or not by pressing my pinky against the ring finger or just letting it move. So let me show you how this looks when I'm actually knitting. So I am twisting the yarn on my pinky. This is my working yarn here. Let's start knitting. So I will just be working this few first stitches as I normally would. And as you see, my yarn right here is quite like under some kind of tension. I mean, it's not like really tense, but still you can like see that it's not like free floating. So when I'm not actually like actively knitting a stitch, what is happening is that my pinky is pressed against my ring finger quite tightly. And this lets me actually hold the yarn. So if I pull on it, because I am holding it with these two fingers, I cannot actually like move it. The length of the actual yarn that I have here is fixed. So when I am knitting a stitch, can you see that I have this yarn under tension? So even if I like wanna pull on it, like I don't have any free yarn to pull on. So my stitch gets nice and small. Now let's do another one. Still, so I have not moved my pinky. I always have it like pressed to my ringed finger. And when I need more yarn, like I would like to have more yarn because I don't have enough to knit one more stitch. Then I would just kind of move my pinky a little bit, and now I can actually get some more of that working yarn that I need. So what is happening is when I am knitting a stitch and when I'm securing it on the right hand needle, I have my pinky pressed to my ring finger so that no matter what's happening, it is nicely fixed. And then when I need to knit another one and maybe I need some more thread, I am just releasing my pinky just a little bit so I get a bit more thread available. So there we have it. This is how I do that. Can you see that I always have this thread under tension. And I know people use different ways to control their tension when they're knitting. Like, for example, what we could do, I know some people position their yarn like this. So they go on top of their index finger, under the other ones, and then on top of their pinky. And this is how they are able to control the tension, once again, by pressing the yarn in between the two fingers. I also know that some people find this position helpful, so they can actually hold the yarn with the middle finger and the ring finger, and they do have this tension of the yarn. I'm not the master of doing this, but this is just for demonstration purposes. The thing is, you really need to find a wrap that works for you. I also know some people that wrap their yarn multiple times on their index finger. And as I said, I'm not the best person to show this. And what they do when they don't have like enough yarn to knit with, they will just unravel the yarn on their fingers. So it actually depends how you want to do it. And I'm sure if you knit continental, there is a way of holding your yarn and maybe, I don't know, twisting it in between your fingers, or maybe finding a way to do it differently, like for example like this, or some people do something that looks like this. So basically the main idea is to find a way that feels comfortable and a way that lets you stop the yarn at any given moment. So let me just do my grip that I'm used to. And let me tell you, when I started practicing it, it was super natural. Like, I used to hold my yarn just like normally. So without holding the tension. And when you are not holding your tension, you cannot, like for example, say I got this stretch stitch. Like, can you see how big it is in comparison with the other ones? Like, if I have my tension, like if I can control it, I can just tighten this stitch easily just by moving my index finger. And actually what you want to learn to control is the size of your stitches. So I'm here knitting on 3mm needles, and as you can see, my stitches are all tightly hugging the knitting needle. And how I do that is when I knit a stitch, I make sure I tighten it a bit so that all of the yarn that I have actually hugs my knitting needle, my right knitting needle. So can you see there are basically no gaps in between the yarn and my knitting needle? Because if you have your yarn floating freely like this on the needle, you will not get 3mm gauge ever. So if you are struggling with your gauge being too big, and if you find that you need to switch to smaller circumference needles, for example, when you are using a pattern, this might be the problem that you have, that your stitches are too loose on your needles. What happened here? I think I was talking and not actually looking at what I'm doing. So yeah, if you have this problem of your gauge being too big for the project that you want to work for, maybe this is the problem. Now let's talk about purls, because we have already seen that your purls can actually differ from your knits. So I'm switching to the purling side of my swatch, and I'm gonna do a few knits here in the beginning, because this is what I do for my swatch to not curl up. And from here I will be purling. And when I'm doing this, so when I'm purling, as you can see, my stitches by default are quite loose, because when you are purling, this is way off like a bigger like movement than the knitting movement. So what I find that I need to do is that after I have purled every stitch, I need to tighten my stitches on the needle, and I do it the same way as I did with knits. So I am holding my tension, my yarn with these two fingers, and I am just pushing my index finger back. And can you see how this tightens my loop, my stitch on the needle? Let's do a few more. So it is really loose on the needle, but I really want it nice and close. So there we go, there we have it. So I am tightening my purls every time I purl. Another thing that some people find useful is when you're knitting back and front. For example, when you're knitting a cardigan, you might consider switching your purling needle. So this one, the right one, in this situation, you might consider changing it to a bit smaller needle, so a smaller circumference needle. So when I will be purling with, for example, 3mm needles, and when I'm knitting, so when I am on this side, I will be knitting with 3.5mm needle, for example. So we'll have 3.5 here for my right needle when I'm knitting, and then 3mm needle when I'm purling. So when I'm on a knit row, I will be working my stitches with 3.5, and when I'm on purls, I will be purling with 3mm needles. And some people do say that this actually improves how their stockinette looks like, but I find that actually controlling how big my stitches are and making sure I'm tightening all of these actually makes a very big difference. So there you have it. Experiment with your ways of holding your yarn and controlling the tension when you're knitting. This will feel really, really unnatural at first, but then trust me, like when I was knitting without holding the tension, I was struggling. So you will get used to it and you will get perfect fabric, perfect stockinette every time.